Hey everybody, this is Brent from The Second Look. This evening I have the pleasure of speaking with AJ Eaton. AJ, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Brent, good to meet you too. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Great. Thank you for your time. We want to cover kind of your story in the next 45 minutes or so.
Sure.
But I
You
we
don't know
all
what you're in for.
yeah. But yeah, kind of I think the best place to start is always in the beginning where always curious because everybody's got a different origin story. What was it? Was it an experience, a film, something that kind of lit that spark for you where it was like, hey, maybe I want to do this?
Well, my origin story was that there was these wise guys in a manger, and there's a camel, and there was like this bright star, and I was born there. And then, no, I'm just kidding. Bad joke. I was born in Idaho, believe it or not. My my this topic, my family origins, is something that's very kind of at the top of my mind right now because I'm writing a movie, writing a screenplay about my family that
Okay.
we'll talk about later. But
Yeah.
my dad is a musician, and he's a songwriter, and essentially kind of raised a family with four songs. And we had a recording studio at our house in Idaho, which is really odd and random in rural Idaho, outside
Okay.
of Pocatello, Idaho.
Okay.
But my mother was Italian. She comes from an Italian family, so I'm actually a dual citizen, Italy
Okay.
and in the US, which is really random. But so my dad, I grew up, being around his music and all of his musical friends, and very, very talented guy and really great writer. And he was hired throughout when he was really working a lot, to write some songs for some like regional documentaries up in Idaho and Montana. And they had somehow set up, I mean, he had some reel to reel machines and his piano and his number of like all of his gear, and they had set up a playback device where he could scroll back and forth on it. It was like probably a 3/4 inch tape machine, and I just saw that magic that happens when you're watching footage, and then all of a sudden the music would come in.
Mm,
The magic, the alchemy between putting music to moving image, all of a sudden just becomes this thing. And
yeah.
it's like you start seeing different colors in the footage, and it just starts meaning something. So I just
Yeah.
became kind of addicted to that idea, and I was chasing that. I loved like, so we had a video camera, and we had one TV channel where I grew up, where it was through antenna.
Huh.
And if we were lucky on Saturday night, my brother and I could go up to one TV and sort of like do the whole antenna dance and get Saturday Night Live, which was like our, you know, absorbing into our molecular structure from that point.
Right.
But
Right.
so as a result, like I had this video camera, and I was like figuring out a way to do films. And so that's sort of how I got interested in becoming a filmmaker
Yeah. That's
and
great.
pursuing a career doing that. And then later on, I mean, it's so funny because, like, we have YouTube now. I mean, anyone can just take a camera or their iPhone or whatever and just make a film, throw it up on YouTube. But back then, I'm trying to make myself sound like dated here, but like, we had a community access TV channel where you could go in and take a class and learn the fundamentals of editing, camera work, how to mic someone, how to light someone. Then if you could check a camera out, and you could just go make a film, and you could put it on the air. Now, for a small town, Pocatello, Idaho, you're showing your video on air was like
Yeah. That's
kind of
awesome.
cool. But I just became one of those video kids, those AV kids.
Right.
Then I kind of got drawn into doing. I was like, okay, I'm going to move to LA, and I moved. I moved down here. I'm based in LA, and I moved here. And it's just, I mean, and I'd already, like, from age 16 on, I was already working as a professional in in television and in advertising in Idaho, where there was an NBC station there. I was a cameraman for that station. I was working at an ad agency, which was like crazy because the ad agency had an office that was right across the street from my high school, this like business building. And so I would roll in and I had a parking spot. And so it's like, my friends in high school are like, what the hell, AJ? Like, how did you get that parking spot? Well, I work at this ad agency. You do? So I was up there like editing radio commercials and assisting in any way I could because I just love the creative process. I love just like,
Yeah.
and there were a lot of just really fun people. And of course, my dad knew those guys from the ad agency because he did jingles,
Mm.
advertising music too. And that's a whole other story. Anyway, so after a while, I'd met some people that had moved to Idaho and sort of like were Hollywood people who had houses in Idaho that needed to come in and like have tape copied or whatever. And so I
Uh-huh.
started working for one company that was owned by I worked for a guy as an assistant who was a really prolific movie trailer editor
Mm.
and just knew Hollywood stuff, member of the Academy. And
Okay.
so I was working. So then I was like, all right, I gotta move to LA. Like I've maximized all of my
Yeah.
resources um,
Yeah.
available in Idaho, of which it's like, believe it or there's not much. At least back then. I mean, nowadays you can get a Mac computer and just
Mhm.
but so theoretically, there's no camera houses up there. There are no, grip that now there are, but like in Salt Lake and Boise there are, but like where I was, there was no way you could get a light, no way you could get a sound, that stuff. So anyway, I moved to LA and I ended up working on some as a PA. I mean, I definitely paid my dues in the
Mhm.
business.
Mhm.
Worked for some producers and ended up working on some Oscar telecasts and working, which was like my first film school. Worked for a guy named Chuck Workman, who is an Oscar winner himself. And every Oscars, there was always a tribute or a montage that Chuck would put together. It was like celebrating a certain writer or celebrating the, action or whatever. And it was like the opening of the Oscars were usually something that Chuck did.
Yeah. I love those. I love those.
Yeah, I mean, the Oscars are supposed to celebrate
Yeah.
movies.
Yeah,
That's what
totally.
they're about. They're supposed to be for movie fans. So uh, so it was cool because I got to town and I was like, 21 years old. And then Chuck would say, like, I need you to get me a shot from Sunset Boulevard. I need you to get a shot from the apartment. I need you just to do it. And so it's like I was watching all the classics because I needed those to put in an Oscar montage. Or Ernest Lehman, who wrote a number of Oscar, they did a special tribute to him, and I worked on that, and then a number of other projects. So I was kind of bouncing back and forth between some production companies, and then sort of like you got, even my bosses at that time, I was going, well, I'm trying to get into USC or UCLA, and I'm trying to get in as like as an in-state resident and all of that
Mm.
at film school, and then like through a couple of people that were just like, look, I'm gonna be honest with you, like film school is kind of a joke, and I'm like, what? And they're like, yeah, like you should definitely finish your degree, but don't think that you can't major in something else. Like go major in English or go major in history or something like that. Like all of the technical stuff you've got that down already.
Right.
Lenses, camera editing, and I was way advanced on that because I'd been editing since I was 16.
Mhm.
And running camera for like TV news. Like I knew how to go and set up and get a shot, and
Yeah.
it became something where it was like low stakes, just do it. So anyway, I like through a number of circumstances, I ended up getting another cool job, which was like one of the coolest jobs one can ever have working in the opening and closing ceremonies of the Olympics in 2002, which is like you have a live televised theatrical performance with like ice skaters and performers, all the people that made costumes for Lion King on Broadway. And you had Michael Kamen, you had John Williams, you had Sting and Yo-Yo Ma. It was so amazing and fun. And it was like, you know, I love live TV too, in a
Mm,
way. Like,
mm,
so it was just exciting. It was like the show must go on. And there's all
right.
these guys that worked on the Oscars. So there I was back like 2 hours away from where I was born in Salt Lake, working with guys that I worked at the Oscars. It was kind of
Uh-huh.
so, but I like ultimately knew that I wanted to finish off my degree and wanted to, you know, write and direct.
Hmm.
So with the encouragement after paying my dues, I mean, it's a tough business. I mean, you know, that movie Swimming with Sharks, like it was, I lived that. And
Yeah.
so, dealing with tyrannical hothead directors who had major anger management problems. And, but anyway, so I ended up deciding like, all right, well, I'm going to finish like my last 2 years of my degree. And I went and finished at Boise State University.
Okay.
And so, and then ironically, I connected with some directors that were living in Idaho, back in Idaho, who were very notable filmmakers and so on there. Then moved back to LA again and was working back on some things, and I was directing some short films. I directed some short films, one that was like Palm Springs premiere, and I ended up going to Japan and doing
Mm,
some short films and stuff. And it was just like I was just kind of like finding what my voice was
yeah.
as a filmmaker.
Yeah.
What things made me tick, and like I got really into Hal Ashby and the music and that, you know, the folk music and but like I directed a short film, and then some people said, well, have you seen Being There? And I said, that's one movie I hadn't seen. And so anyway, like I kind of like I made this film that was very kind of Hal Ashby-esque, but had not seen it Hal Ashby. So then I got really crazy in Hal Ashby anyway. So
Uh-huh.
it's just kind of interesting how my life sort of just like would manifest certain things.
Sure. Yeah.
So, but I was like, all right, I want to make a film. And so I had got hired to write or type a screenplay for a director, and that has directed some pretty big movies. And he wrote his screenplays like this on a yellow steno pad. That was
Uh-huh.
his. And then he would hand them off, and some typist would type them up.
Hmm.
And so as boring as that sounded, it was like, oh wow, I'm like immersed into this screenplay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I was typing in like all of the names of the characters, and then I would like deliver the pages that he would write that day, and then we would sit and have a discussion about it.
Mm,
And so I sort of knew where he was going in the story,
yeah.
and that was a cool just opportunity in a way. And so then like after that, I was like, I just had gotten the screenwriting thing under my fingers,
Yeah.
and so started just writing short films, and then I decided I was going to write. Like I got really inspired by. I'm like, I'm going to draw upon some experiences that I had in Idaho, and wrote some screenplays about that, and was shopping that project around town. Um, which is I have to be vague because
Okay.
it's written about something that was at the time that I wrote it was like this could happen, and it political, but it's also kind of like a, you know, like inspired by it's like a missing man. You know, a guy goes missing in a wilderness, a very controversial wilderness preserve in like fictitious Idaho or Montana,
Okay.
and the Secretary of the Interior is like lobbying to sell this place off to like some private company, and they're making this big media spectacle, which is essentially what's going on right now. But I wrote that in like 2010, you know, and thinking like one day that like the GOP conservative people who are obsessed with like federal lands, thinking that they're like a burden on the taxpayer or whatever.
Right.
And I saw that firsthand growing up in Idaho because
Mm,
I saw the wolf reintroduction, and I saw how people got really crazed and obsessed about that, thinking that was like the federal government putting in a predator that was killing their livestock. was really like, I've got stories. And because I grew up on 13 acres
Yeah.
in Idaho where, like I say, we have one TV channel. And so, and I saw like, you know, poachers come in on the adjacent property and kill,
Mm,
would have like this, it had a catastrophic domino effect on the miniature little ecosystem that we
right.
lived by. And so
Right.
I was like, well, that resonates with something that really, to me. Anyway, so I had that screenplay and I was having a lot of meetings about it and with my intention I was going to direct that movie.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the same time, because I come from this musical family, I have a brother who was following in the footsteps of my dad, and he's out and he's this massively talented guitarist. And we have a mutual friend of ours who said, "You ought to meet David Crosby." So he and my David Crosby and my brother really hit it off.
Mm-hmm.
Surprisingly so, like, you know how it is, like the big show business could be like everyone's got a name that they're going to drop, and like, oh, I'm friends with, Harrison Ford. You ought to meet, I'll introduce you to Harrison. It's like, really? Like, so, but anyway, but this person who's really like just a wonderful, wonderful person introduced my brother and Crosby, and then they hit it off and they started writing music together. And then I got invited just on a random day here in LA, and I've been in studios a lot in my life, and I get along really well with musicians. And I think the reason why I get along well with musicians is because I'm not trying to be one, but I know I can talk their language because I kind of play a little piano and I know, but I'm not competing. I'm just a complimentary, so I go into this recording session. My brother's there working, and it was my brother said, you got to come meet Cross. And so I'm like, wow, that's wild. Like David Crosby. Cause I remember, I saw him on the cover of what was it? One of the tabloid magazines of like, an addict, David Crosby. And then he was also on the cover of Rolling Stone because he was a sperm donor to Melissa Etheridge's kids. So I was like thinking about all those things. And I knew that he was like this notorious addict and guy had gone to jail and everything. And I'm driving into the studio like, oh, this is going to be interesting. And like, I had no expectations at all. And he defied every one of them when I met him. And they were working on what was his first solo album in 20 years, an album that was called Cross. And so, which was his nickname that everyone knew him with. So like, I just like sat down, just started like visiting. I'm like, man, I really love those changes. Like they're very jazz changes, aren't they? And he goes, you like that, huh? And I mean, I became like his best buddy from that point forward. Like I
Mm-hmm.
could see, I wasn't like asking him like, what was it like at Woodstock or anything like that. I was just being like discovering the guy right there
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
through the music and all that. So
Right.
we just all became friends because an album was like was snowballing right in front of us. And I said, you know what? Like we ought to shoot some footage of this. And like, and some other people had encouraged me too. My brother, obviously, and like AJ, you gotta make a film about this. So, and I was like, God, like it's so crazy. We should. And so I went up to Crosby and I was like nervously, look, why don't we shoot some footage of you guys working in the studio? And he goes, knock yourself out, Mr. Filmmaker. I don't have any money. And so I'm going, okay, great. So I called the same DP that I shot some of my short films with, a guy named Tom Bango, great guy. And so we just like showed up in the studio and we just started grabbing angles. And next thing you know, like my like premonition was like Crosby was going to light up when a camera was around him because that's Crosby. I mean, if he wasn't a musician, he was going to be an actor. So, and we just started getting some really cool footage of him working with his son, who he reunited with after he gave him up for adoption. It was a whole big, cool story there, and my brother's there, and I really responded to that whole scene because being the son of a songwriter,
Right.
and there's some stuff there that was, really resonating with me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we started shooting footage, and then pretty soon we got some great stuff. And I had like cut together some EPKs for his albums,
Mm.
And then so we sort of kind of got the like, oh, we're talking about the music out of the way, out of the system, if you know what I mean. Like, well, in this song we're talking about this, and then but it was like every now and then it was like I get a question of like, Crosby, how you feeling today? Like, well, like it's weird because my band's arguing and that kind of stuff. But that wasn't going to be used in the EPKs to advertise his album. But I was like secretly banking stuff.
Sure. Right.
So I was like, I want to make this film. I think there's a film there. And at the same time, I had financing for the scripted movie that I was telling you about, The
Okay.
Missing Man. Coincidentally, like I had met when I was telling Crosby about the story, he goes, man, I really want to see that movie. It really sounds interesting. It's really cool. And I was like, it has a twist ending. And um, so, but we're kind of like just piecing together brick by brick this movie about Crosby, not really sort of, and at the same time, I saw the Keith Richards Under the Influence documentary. And I'm going, okay, like there's an appetite out there for something that was going to be in the same realm of like, it's not a Crosby, Stills and Nash documentary. It's a documentary about Crosby
Mm-hmm.
and or like a slice of his life or a portrait of an artist at this time, like in his third
Yeah.
act.
Right. Right.
So I then again, I started cutting together footage of that and borrowing money from friends and family. And I mean, because we knew like, and then I met some really wonderful person named Jill Mazursky, comes from a legendary Hollywood family. And she is a huge rock music fan. I mean, just concerts all the time. And she's just loves it. So when I told her that I'd work in Crosby, she, we had to make a Crosby movie. We had to do that. I'm going, yeah, I agree. So we started cutting together some footage just to kind of show, but it was like making a movie, a documentary, especially one about Crosby, is expensive.
Mm.
And it is, it got to the point where I had sort of maximized my proverbial credit card and Crosby's going out on tour and I'm, like terrified because I couldn't afford to shoot him going on tour and leaving home, but I also felt like I couldn't afford not to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is the plight of a documentary filmmaker. It's like, what do you shoot? Is that worth it? Sometimes you shoot stuff it's not great at all, but I think maybe I was going back to those days of me being a news photographer
Mm-hmm.
where it was like I could go and show up on a scene and get a shot
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and at least like figure out if there's a story here or figure out what's going to be the most visually appealing part of that story, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, we were shopping that with Jill Mazursky. I coming aboard as a producer, as an executive producer. We started shopping that footage
Mm-hmm.
around. And man, the Hollywood stories that I have about that phase and that era will blow your mind.
Yeah.
Lots of production companies were both interested, but they were also saying that he's a has-been. Lots of production companies were interested, but they're also saying, I mean, they just didn't understand what was going on. I don't think they quite, but that's okay. I mean, I think that's typical with any outing, any offering you put up in Hollywood. Like, someone might love your screenplay and another person will just like not understand it. But I had like gone around town just pitching the hell out of it and with the idea that we needed to get another big producer who was then going to help us activate another realm of financing and that's
Mm-hmm.
what you would do with a feature film as well.
Right. Right.
So I had almost given up. I had almost like decided that I with this bizarre meeting at, I can't tell you what agency it was, but it was just bizarre. And these people were rolling in and they're going, maybe you co-direct with this rap music video director. And I'm going, well, I don't think you guys understand what Crosby's all about here. And I mean, someone had actually suggested at one point that maybe they would finance the film if we like made the film about Crosby doing an album with Drake or something. And which was one of their, and I'm going, wow, Hollywood, like this is not. So I and Jill is like, that was the weirdest meeting I've ever been to. Anyway, so I was like ready just to pack up and like just go, I'm going to go and do something else. We went back to Jill's office, and Jill and J.J. Abrams wrote their first screenplays together.
Yeah.
And so at Bad Robot, and on the list of people that I was trying to talk to, and I kind of bumped into him at the Troubadour one night, was Cameron Crowe.
Mm.
But he was at Bad Robot, and so I'm like, there, that's it. There's Cameron. And so Jill said, I'll go talk to him. I'll go. So I left and had some other stuff going on. And then Jill calls me. She's like, I just talked to Cameron Crowe. And I told him that we were making this film about Crosby and we're already shooting. And he damn near fell off his chair. And it's just crazy. Like, he's obsessed with Crosby. And he just so happened to have brought his favorite album, which is If I Can Only Remember My Name, to a writing session that they were having at Bad Robot for this TV series that he was working on with J.J. Abrams. And so he wants to meet with you tomorrow, she tells me. I will be there.
Yeah.
That's exactly why you live and work in LA.
Mm.
Because there are going to be meetings and people here for whatever, and you're here. There's a reason why I don't live in Idaho. I love it there, and the reason why I don't live in Italy, love it there. But like, the reason why I'm here is because I'm here to make movies. So anyway, went and met with him the next day, and I said, listen, I mean, Crosby. And he goes, he's talking to you? He's like, yes, he is. And I remember he was just like sitting there tapping his pencil on his yellow steno pad, going, man, that's just crazy. Wow. Well, I'm doing this TV series right now, so I'm booked for like a year out, but would you let me do an interview with him, with Crosby? And I'm going, absolutely. Yes. Yes, Cameron
Yeah.
Crowe. You and Crosby. I've been interviewing him since I was like 17, and like, he always gave me these great, candid, like really blunt, interviews. And I'm going, absolutely. That sounds absolutely great. Because so we, like, within a matter of like weeks, we had set up an interview at Jackson Brown's studio. And I told Crosby, I was like, Cameron Crowe's going to come and interview you. We're going to take this movie to the next thing. And he just kind of like, what? Cameron? He is? And so then Cameron called him and said, yeah, I'm going to interview you. So we sat down and we do like interview number one. And like, there were some pretty cool omissions there and blunt, because Crosby was just known for being a blunt dude, and he just would say stuff which was also get him in a lot of trouble. So anyway, we got interview number one, and like, I kind of had like a post interview chat with Cameron Crowe, and man, I mean, we got some good stuff there that is so crazy cool, and just like his enthusiasm and his energy, and so I'm going, I agree. So he, like, Crosby had to go and fly to New York to mix his album. And then Cameron had to just disperse, and it was like, that. And so I'm going, all right, well, what do we do next? So I cut together some more footage and sort of shopped that around with like, okay, well, Cameron Crowe's done some interview with Crosby, and I've got all this other footage of him recording his albums, and he's at his house with his family. And then I get a call from Cameron again. And it's like, you know what? Like, I really want to interview him again. Like, I think that we should get him another interview while he's talking. And I'm going, absolutely, we should. So next interview we book in, and it was like we went into deeper territory, and and Crosby was admitting stuff that was pretty blunt, which he's known to do.
Right.
So Cameron, I think, could just see that Crosby was ready to talk, and we just sort of started working together on the film. I mean, I was the director, but it was a kind of a partnership, because I come from the 92 and above Crosby era, which I love, with uniting with his son and such. And then of course Cameron is like the 90 and behind era. So it was a great compliment.
Yeah.
And so we just kept interviewing him, and then at the same, and so it just, some Hollywood stuff just started kind of synergizing. Clouds parted, and it started to rain Skittles, because the record label that Crosby was working for was starting to finance movies. And so I went and met with them and said that I'm working on this project. And I was very careful about how you present names and so on. And I said, well, there's some interviews that Camera Crow's done. And the lady who was the head of their finance division there was like, well, I worked with Cameron. I was his assistant on Almost Famous. So I'll call him up and talk to him. So if we didn't make a deal in that case, and at the same time, because I'd worked for probably 4 different major film directors, Oscar winners, through a variety of different means, from typing their scripts to cleaning out their storage units when I was 18 years old, I picked up a couple of things along the way.
Yeah.
That's why you do that stuff.
Right.
One was that when you're going to make a movie, you bring in the best. You surround yourself with just a team of like complete badasses. That this isn't high school buddy time. I mean, no slag to your high school buddies, but your high school buddy had to have an award-winning DP. So I got some serious. I mean, I went and met with this great editor named Lisa Bernara, who's an Italian editor, and as you understand, I have a background working with Italian women editors. I worked on a movie called Game 6. It was edited by this lady, Camilla Toniolo, that was directed by the director I was working with. So we could just basically speak our language, and even though my Italian is italibrete. So she said, I've got a film here. And she invited me up to her house in Topanga Canyon, and we made pasta and we watched this footage. So, she was working with James Keach, and who has a company called PCH Films, and they had just finished off the Glenn Campbell documentary. And so, and coincidentally, like Glenn Campbell had recorded a song my dad wrote as well. And so I had sort of like, oh, well, not that I knew those guys or anything, and not that my dad knows them or anything, but I just was like, we had synergy. So by the time like the deal came through, I had made this great, like put this team together, like ace producer, Michelle Farinola, who had been nominated for an Oscar, produced a film that was nominated for an Oscar, George Harrison film, directed by Scorsese. She was working with James, and she also Undefeated, I think, won an Oscar. She produced that as a documentary. And then I had Elisa, and I had some great DPs working with me, and so Cameron felt really comfortable. And I just think that that's like another whole thing, like a young filmmaker. You show that you're not playing around. This is not like, and I say it's the high school. It's not high school. This is serious business. And so Cameron was really, I think he was very impressed by the fact that I wanted to find the best people, because this is Crosby. This is a legendary person, Crosby. And Cameron loved the idea that I had made this like independent, no studio executives stopping by our workplace. And so we got financing, and we're cutting away, and it was still terrifying because we're cutting as we're sort of shooting some stuff. And Crosby's his wife's calling me, telling me that she's got she's taking him to the hospital because he's got 8 stents in his heart, and he's getting another stent in his heart. And then meanwhile, we're still waiting for the damn financing to actually get the check to us.
Right.
And so it was, I mean, I'm telling you, like there's a whole other thing that has to do what I can't talk about, but like there's a whole other thing. Like this was like me being a beleaguered director, handling all of these like things. I was producing the film, the budget, the crew, recruiting the crew, writing like how I saw the film coming together. It was Crosby's leaving home, going on tour, which he had done time and time again, and he's dealing with these health issues. And so his doctors are saying, you should not be touring. That's like the worst thing on anyone. The food's bad. You don't get any sleep. It's really taxing physically, emotionally. You're singing.
Yeah.
And like he should have like said, I'm going to start like maybe do a residency or something. But he was like 70 years old and ready to roll, you know?
Yeah.
So he was addicted to singing because he loved singing, and so that was the shape of the movie. That was the way that the movie should have been.
Yeah.
So anyway, I was really proud of the team that I was able to get to work with. So we cut together the film, and based on the treatment about him leaving home and the risks that you take by leaving home, and while he's on tour, he's reliving moments from his legendary life
Yeah.
and kind of going on tour and thinking about, you know,
Right.
and it just sort of worked out. It was like we were finding really great archival footage, and the whole kind of the narrative arc was sort of
Mm-hmm.
there.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, we cut the movie together, and we had shown it. Cameron and I were working in tandem in the edit bay and thinking about what we need to talk to him next when we interview him. And we go back and we would interview him again. And as we continued to interview him, as Cameron, who's rock star whisperer he is, Crosby just kept saying, making these incredible omissions. So it was like, I'm afraid to die, which is the first 4 minutes of the movie.
Mm.
You're going from him reminiscing, telling a story that I heard him tell in a recording studio, which was really hilarious, about going to see Coltrane in Chicago, being high. And then you have a story about him. Then he admits that he's afraid to die, and it was really um like this contrast of this like guy
Yeah.
larger than
Yeah.
life, living vibrantly, and then also saying that I don't have much time. So it was really it was
Mm.
we were gifted with some just amazing story. He was such a great storyteller, and really great the way he spoke and his cadence. So anyway, we cut the movie together, and we had a number of gatherings where we would show cuts to people, and we would start just gathering intel from, because the film starts talking to you. And we were, really not endeavoring to make a film that is about that celebrate. It's not a like a hagiography. Oh, gee, wasn't Crosby great? Like we wanted to do something that was brutally honest,
Yeah.
uh, and it revealing, and not like your typical rock doc. And Cameron was really into that. So we and what we found out was that like the more you showed his contradictory dark side, and the more people liked the movie, and the more that they liked him. And so, and once it's like, I saw an interview with Alan Silvestri, and he was talking about the creative process where it just goes, no idea, no idea, no idea. And all of a sudden it's just like, I got an idea, And so we, for a while, we're like, we were making progress on cutting the movie and shooting the movie and cutting the movie. And then all of a sudden we found the thing,
Right.
which was there,
Yeah.
but was like, and then it just sort of informs every scene that you cut together. And you would do the same thing on a screenplay. But what's Crosby's goal? Or who is Crosby? What's his goal? What's standing in his way to get his goal? What's going to happen if he doesn't get it? And so we found that. We think that his goal in life was to be loved, and, probably wasn't loved enough by his father, who happened to be a Oscar winning DP, Floyd Crosby. And there could be something there. And what is he loves the joy and adulation and the praise and the love that he gets from singing. And the thing that's standing in his way is his own ego and his health problems. And so like you're feeling this like this presence of like, like this guy, he's he's living on borrowed time.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, it was a really amazing experience. And so we had like, I like to temper my, I have big dreams, but I also have to temper, like everyone's like, well, we want to submit this movie to this festival and this festival. And I had sort of like, well, we'll try, but like, I think we'll probably go for Showtime or something like that. But we were able to convince the powers that be, like, let's give us a little bit more time so we can submit to Sundance. And Sundance called me and said, like, we would love to show your movie in competition.
Mm.
And that was a real like, oh my God, okay. Because they said they see the film as not just a rock music documentary, of which they will do a lot of premiere. They have their kind of section where they do like,
Yeah.
celebrity oriented films, but they're outside of competition. But they said, no, we really loved this film as a documentary. He was like Forrest Gump,
Right.
privy to all these moments in in our. And I said, well, we call him Forrest Grumps. So there's that. And we were really lucky to, because honestly, when you make a film, you don't really know what you have on your hands. You
Mhm.
kind of do. You show it to you have these little like work in progress screenings, and you get notes back, and there's other filmmakers that you invite, and then you just have some random friends and all that, and you're gathering intel,
Yeah.
and then you start, like, in a way, you almost start losing sight of what you have. And so then you have to look at the film through an audience's eyes.
Yeah.
And so, but you never know until that, like, the premiere.
Yeah.
Even though you might have we weren't a studio film, so we couldn't do like a
Yes.
preview screening and go back and do that. But we did our smaller ones.
Yeah.
But we premiered at Sundance, and the response was just incredible. I mean, just defied all of the expectations that I had, because, as a director, you're like,
Yeah. Right.
nail that. And I had to cut that scene out. And oh my God, I really, so yeah. And so and Sony Classics bought the film, and that was a real, they're wonderful, they've got great taste in movies, and
Hmm.
released a lot of my favorite movies. So then, we did the whole, premieres, and the reviews and the acclaim were just, I mean, just defied. We had a rocket ship. And so Crosby was really happy, and it was only like, I want to say 3 or 4 years later, to the day that we premiered,
Mm.
on the 26th of January, that he passed away. So that living on borrowed time
Yeah.
theme is very salient in that. So
Mhm.
we were able to catch lightning in a bottle, when it happens.
Wow. Wow. That's incredible. And I fascinated by especially documentary filmmaking, because you in so many instances that I've heard, you're kind of flying blind a bit, right? Because you don't know what you're going to get, or what you need to get. Like you said, it took you months and months, maybe, and cuts and cuts, to finally find that hook, that thesis statement or whatever. So it's a discovery process. It's more than a creative process, in general terms.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And it's a leap of faith, right? And you landed it, right? You landed on the other side.
Yeah, I think that you have to be both open to what may happen in front of you, but also have an idea.
Hmm.
But in the same way of a feature film or a screenplay, you're going to have to resign the fact that you're going to kill some darlings, kill some. And there were a number of darlings that I sadly, and with tears in my eyes, had to let go. I'm still sick about it.
Yeah.
But like I described, the metaphorically, it's like you're making a documentary about a trip that you're going to take on your sailboat to Hawaii. And so you're anticipating some beautiful sunsets. You're anticipating, you need life preservers, you need food and all that. But what you don't anticipate is like the pod of dolphins that follows you the entire time.
Yeah.
And the stranded man with a volleyball named Wilson that you come on, like, you got to be open and ready, and you got to be ready to say, okay, well, now I'm going to have to divert my entire narrative. And we were ready for that with Crosby.
Sure.
There were a couple of times where, I mean, the big question on a documentary is, how do you end it? And when do you stop shooting?
Right.
And so I had like a fail safe. If all things fail, break glass and shoot this shot. I won't tell you what it is because you haven't seen the film, but like there was a Hollywood ending that was going to be oh so great. And I had like put with our producer, Michelle, some money in the budget aside. And that was like there to get that one shot.
Okay.
Thankfully, we didn't have to get that, but metaphorically and operationally, we did. And that's what was cool.
Wow. And it seems like documentaries weren't really where you were headed anyways, right? So like this kind of came in, it just kind of swept you up and it kind of took you along and you just went for it. And I I, I think that's really an important lesson, I think, for filmmakers. Like you're saying, there's sometimes where you have expectations, you have a plan, but then you kind of have to roll with whatever comes your way, even if it's like a scripted narrative thing, some weather issue or something, and you have to improvise. Like just like that nimbleness is part of the job, and it manifests in different ways. But it's a skill, and it's a that kind of it's like a compromise, but you have to trust that it's going to work out somehow, and just
Yeah.
get both it.
As we say, like these stories choose you.
Mm.
I like the piece of advice that I was given. Like I go and we'll show the Crosby movie to some film students and all of that. And there's some people that are asking, well, what, like they're going into scripted fare like I am, like am doing, but all of a sudden, like, some people go, well, I don't really know what movie I want to do. And I'm going, no one has your perspective. No one has your experience.
Yeah.
Even if you grew up in a family and you have an identical brother
Yeah.
or an identical twin, like
Mhm.
you have your experience and that's your story. And like you may think that your experience or your perspective is not interesting, but it actually really is. And so with the like all of the stuff with Crosby, it was just like, well, I was honing my, out writing and really like suffering over these like narratives that were like, well, I have this idea and I'm pitching it. And I learned that from some of the directors that I worked with. I mean, these guys were just like constantly tormented by their their screenplays.
Yeah.
Understand it? And do you get it? Well, yeah, I read it and I got no, but like, are you feeling the emotion? Like that kind of stuff. And then like Crosby comes along and I was like, well, that checks a lot of the boxes that of the language that I can, as I mentioned, I can speak. So I just, I would say like there have been a number of times where I've rejected what were great like opportunities right in front of my face because I had a preconceived notion. Anyway, so yeah, and I think that's the way that you just need to, I think, look at let certain stories just kind of choose you, and they're there for you to tell them, whether you realize it or not.
Yeah, yeah. I like that. I like that idea that you have, even if it's a familiar story that you're telling, your perspective, like you're saying, your worldview, how you manifest that story through you and your sensibilities, and you should trust that, right? Like you should believe that you do have something to say, that you do have something to add to it. I think, yeah, the originality seems to be kind of a tough thing for filmmakers, and especially trying, in the higher up you get, the opportunity to be original, it gets less and less.
True.
But if it's, I don't know where I was going with that, but just believing that you do have something to say, that you do have something to provide or add to it, and it doesn't have to reinvent the wheel, right? It just
Right.
has to be through your eyes and your, like, the confidence that you have to execute what you see and how you see it.
That's right. I I agree. You know, and
Well,
then it goes back to a number of things where like again I go back to when I worked in 16 years old, like here's a camera, go make a film.
yeah,
And I wish I could go back and be like me talking to my younger self,
yeah,
which is like like a scene out of Disney's The Kid or something like that. Okay, like you kind of got it together. What
Right.
you need is a script. And you can write this script, but don't think you can like improvise a film. Not going to happen. Even though there are improvised film, you know. And so, but it took me trying to figure that out. And,
Mhm.
and then, you know, you have your blueprint. Once I kind of got into that screenwriting thing, I was typing scripts. I was like, oh God, like I know it's like an art learning how to draw up plans from an architect.
Right.
And then you can go like, I can see it.
Yeah.
So,
Right. I mean, that's great. I wanna highlight that part of your story as well, like, for people who are looking for jobs, can't find jobs, but then they find something and it doesn't seem very interesting or it seems tedious or non-creative. You know, your job of typing up someone else's scripts, right? That's not what any burgeoning artist, you know, dreams of. That they want to do their own stuff, right? But in that process, you were able to get that experience that you would not have gotten otherwise, and that it does matter, it does help you, it does shape you so that when you do write your own scripts, you've suddenly got that experience behind you. So the message I like to share is just take those jobs, right? Do whatever job, no matter how menial it seems. It's going to add up to something, and you don't know exactly what yet,
I,
right?
I also just think like, you know, when you're younger and you get that opportunity, it's like, you know, it's like you do it and you just do it so damn well. Because as a filmmaker now, like someone who's out shooting stuff, I keep in mind of those people. You know, I shot something a couple weeks ago, and it was like the gaffer that worked with me on my short films up in Seattle is now here in LA. And he had no, like, he was just gaffing up. He was a gaffer and grip electric guy and really fun, cool guy in Seattle. And I had so it was me and a DP in Seattle, but DP was from LA, the same one I mentioned earlier.
Mhm.
And like this gaffer's just like up there, like wiping sweat off his brow and coming back, looking at the monitor and going, oh shit, you know, like getting under ladders and all that. And the DP was like, whoa, man, like if you ever want to come down to LA, I will get you a job.
Mm.
And because this guy was just like, just going like just Mr. Full of energy and just was not going to let this one little strand of light come down, and now he's here. But like, you know, it was all because of that one moment. And I've heard so many legendary stories like that, or just like two huge directors are rolling through a tour of a, you know, a major studio and someone's like, I'm sorry, you guys, I'd love to talk to you more, but I gotta go get this, these guys are not getting this shot, whatever. And they're going, we want that guy. Yeah, so we want to hire that guy. And then they get a call that changes their life.
Yeah. Yeah. That work ethic, right? That's
Mhm.
because people, yeah, people who doesn't want to work with somebody who has good work ethic, you know, or who has that motivation, and especially if it's your project and you're going to be the biggest cheerleader, and you're trying to surround yourself with people who are just doing a job. But when they do the job like that, when they put it all in for you, like those are the people that get hired and get promoted and all that stuff. That's great.
You know, I think a lot too, like, you know, having, you know, being a filmmaker is really compared and akin to having a band,
Mm,
being in a band.
right.
And, you know, if there are people that make great music and do amazing performances because they perform together for such a long time, or you can use it as you know, the same metaphor as an operating or a surgeon and the team of nurses and anesthesiologists. They've saved
Mhm.
a lot of lives and done a lot of brain transplants. I don't know, but,
Yeah.
and like, but, you know, if you, all of these people working together for a long time and coming together with having, you know, shorthand communication efforts and just, and but you know, starting together as a team, like that's something that I've both marveled at other people who have been able to achieve that, where they, because, you know, I think this business is sort of like people are at with themselves, or it's at
Oh,
war with itself constantly. But yeah, like uh, do a great job at whatever you do.
yes, totally. That's great. AJ, thank you so much for your time. I could listen to you talk for a lot longer. But thank you so much again for your time, and good luck with the script that you're shopping around, right?
Yeah, it's like a script about like advice to people, like, you know, go to therapy or write a or write a script about your family. It will
That's
at the end of one, you'll have something you can go and shop around.
right. Right.
Now we're that, and I pitched a number of TV series, and learned a lot about the world of pitching television series,
Mm,
and then also pitching some other documentaries that resonate. And you do a pitch reel, you do a sizzle, you show that around, and just trying to find the next thing that speaks to me, and
hmm.
also speaks to the people out there that are in position to sanction a film.
Right. Right. All right. Well, thank you, AJ. We'll end it there. But really great talking to you. Thank you for sharing everything. There was a lot of really great stuff in there. So
Sure.
thank you.
Okay. Well, hopefully it was great talking with you too.
Great. Great. All right. Take care.
You too.